Hi, I'm Lily. I am the Policy and Research Director here at Mississippi Votes, and I'm here to talk to you about early voting and why it matters. So what is early voting? It is similar to voting on Election Day. It feels pretty much the same. You walk in, you fill out your ballot, you cast it, there are poll managers, and the hours are 7 to 7, just like Election Day. And I know what you're thinking. This feels really similar to in-person absentee voting in Mississippi. And it is, with a key difference. So absentee voting actually requires requesting a ballot, which happens on the spot if you go in person and you fill it out right then and there. Or if you request it by mail, then it needs to be postmarked by Election Day and received within 3 days. So you need to actually talk to your circuit clerk, request that ballot, and then mail it back. One key thing that differentiates Mississippi's in-person absentee voting from early voting is that Mississippi does not have no excuse absentee voting. You need to meet one of the following qualifications. You need to be away from your county of registration on Election Day to qualify. If you are a student, teacher, or administrator whose school is outside of your home county. If you are temporarily or permanently physically disabled. If you are the parent, spouse, or dependent of a disabled person who is hospitalized outside of their county or lives 50 or more miles away. If you are 65 or older. If you have to work all day during election hours, so 7 to 7. If you are a member, spouse, or dependent of the congressional delegation and you are absent from Mississippi. If you are a disabled war veteran or spouse or dependent in a hospital. If you are a member or spouse or dependent of the Merchant Marine or American Red Cross. So those are the categories where you are eligible to cast an absentee ballot in Mississippi. Early voting would make it so that anyone, without any excuse, could go cast their ballot early, and they wouldn't have to worry about planning logistics around that Tuesday of Election Day. So why does early voting matter? Early voting is not a new or novel concept. At least 47 states in the United States of America allow in-person voting before Election Day. Mississippi is not one of them, so we are an outlier. We actually have some of the most restrictive voter regulations in the country. Early voting benefits everyone, but early voting especially benefits young and transient adults and elderly folks who might have unpredictable schedules, maybe class, maybe a doctor's appointment, and might not have reliable transportation. Minority communities and working class individuals also struggle to get to the polls when they're only open during work hours or shift hours. And limiting ballot access can restrict the political power of an already marginalized community. All communities deserve to have their needs met through representation, and early voting is an important structure to have in place to make sure that happens. Early voting is especially important in Mississippi for several reasons. The first is just how rural we are. More than half of Mississippi's population lives in a rural community, making it one of the most rural states in our country. Why does that matter for voting? When you live in a rural community, a lot of times your polling location is going to be far from home. So if you only have one day to get out and vote, and the transportation or something else gets in the way of that, and your polling location is far away, how likely are you to go and cast your ballot? Elderly and disabled voters need safer, less crowded options also. And working families who can't take time off on Election Day, a lot of times just won't be able to cast their ballot. Natural disasters and severe weather might also disrupt Election Day turnout. Did you know that November is the peak of what's called the secondary season for tornadoes in Mississippi? So this is not actually a hypothetical situation. There really could be a severe weather event on that Tuesday in November that could derail the entire electoral process. And if we don't have early voting, then anyone who wanted to stand in line or cast their ballot might not be able to. High interest elections also generate long lines, where people might look at a line on their lunch break and say, I don't have time to stand in that, and then not go back and cast their ballot. So early voting would alleviate all of those pressure points. They would ensure that every eligible voter has a fair opportunity to participate. They would reduce overcrowding in polling places, and they would increase overall voter confidence and turnout. Like I mentioned, Mississippi is only one of 3 states in the country that doesn't have early voting. Let's take a look at some neighboring states that do. In Georgia, they offer early voting from the 4th Monday before Election Day through the Friday before Election Day. In Louisiana, the early voting window opens up 14 days before Election Day, 18 in presidential elections, and ends 7 days before Election Day. In Arkansas, they allow early voting 15 days before Election Day for primary and general elections, and 7 days for all others, ending the Monday before Election Day. And in Tennessee, they allow you to cast your ballot 20 days before Election Day, all the way up to 5 days before Election Day. 7 days for presidential preference primary. So Mississippi, what are we waiting on? So this 2026 Mississippi legislature session, we saw almost 10 early voting bills come and die. There were several that were pretty much the same. I want to highlight a couple. So SB 2090 was introduced by Senator Blackwell, who is the vice chair of the Senate Elections Committee. His bill would have allowed early voting the Monday, 1 week before election, through the Monday before Election Day. So a whole week of early voting. And that would have also included Saturday hours from 8 a.m. to noon at registrar offices. Senator Simmons also introduced a bill, SB 2213, that would have allowed early voting 20 days before election through the noon on the Saturday before Election Day, 8 to 5 on weekdays and extended hours during that final week. So either of these bills would have increased people's access to the polls, ability to cast a ballot on their own time, and expanded democratic participation opportunities in the state. While there is not currently case law that directly supports a right to early voting, we are monitoring 2 Supreme Court cases that would have a direct impact on people's ability to cast their ballots and seek their representation on the state and federal level. The first is a case called Louisiana versus Calais, which is targeting Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has historically supported early voting campaigns because its central purpose is to protect the voting rights of civically marginalized communities. A ruling that would weaken or eliminate Section 2 could erode broader voting expansion efforts and allow state legislatures to redraw maps in a way that dilute Black and Brown communities' political power. The second case that we're watching is Watson versus Republican National Committee, which directly threatens Mississippi's 5-day post-election absentee ballot window. So currently, like I mentioned in the first part of this series, you can cast a mail-in ballot, and as long as you postmark it on or before Election Day, it will be counted if it is received up to 5 days after Election Day. That law is currently under threat. Restricting absentee ballot return deadlines while blocking early voting is a double threat. A restrictive decision combined with a piece of legislation that was just passed called HB 908, which would require all mail-in absentee ballots to be received the night before Election Day, could cement voter suppression in our state. Removing existing protections without providing alternatives is voter suppression in its purest form, and we need to fight back.